Hi everyone, this is Barbara C. Phillips, founder of Nurse Practitioner Business Owner and the Clinician Business Institute. And today I have with me a very special guest, Juliette Blount. She's an adult nurse practitioner in New York City, and she provides primary and women's health care to a diverse population. But the real reason I have her here today is she is an expert in healthcare disparities. And I met Juliette when she was a fellow in the Duke Johnson & Johnson Nurse Leadership Program, where I was a coach, and I'm so happy to have her here. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about her. So welcome, Juliette.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be invited to your platform, which is so wide and so diverse. I'm sure you have members and followers from around the country. So I really appreciate this opportunity. As Barbara mentioned, I have been a nurse practitioner for 18 years, which sounds crazy to me, but I was a registered nurse for 12 years before I became an NP, so that makes it even a longer period of time that I've been in practice. I work here in New York City, one of the most racially and ethnically diverse cities in the country, if not the world, and I absolutely love it. That's one of the things that I love most about it. What was interesting is that how I started on my health equity journey is that a previous job that I worked at a primary care practice, I was the first and only Black provider, not only at the offices in New York City, but the entire East Coast for the company. So that was New York, Boston, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. And I think it's in my DNA because most of my family is very similar in terms of using our voices to speak out against injustice. I was at the job about 6 months and I kept my mouth shut. And then I was like, okay, can we talk about the fact that I'm the only one on the entire East Coast, and some very specific recommendations for how we can change that? Because I loved the job. I loved the work that I was doing. And I just wanted to improve it, not only for myself and, hopefully bring in other providers of color, but also for the diverse population that we served. That really was not taken as seriously as I would have liked. I did what I could on a one-on-one basis. Because I was the only Black face on the website, I had an extremely large population of patients of color, also other marginalized populations, so large LGBTQ population. I had a lot of patients who worked in social justice. That was their job. And so they wanted to see a provider that they felt had an understanding of that. So I had quite a large following. And as you know, the universe works. I went to an AANP conference, went to a session where someone from the Duke program was speaking. And at that time I was thinking, yeah, you know how you get to that point in your career, you're like, yeah, this is cool and everything, but I'm ready to do something different. I'm not really satisfied with the way things are going now. And then I listened to the talk about Duke, and the whole time I was like, yeah, that, everything you're saying, that is what I need to be doing. So long story short, my project for the Duke program, which is life-changing for anybody who is interested and is at that place in their career where they're ready to take it to the next level, or they want to seek meaning in what they're doing. My project was Implicit Bias in Primary Care. So what my project was I created 2 clinical rounds. At my previous employer, we had weekly clinical rounds where they typically would bring in a provider to talk about specific topics that pertain to primary care. my clinical rounds were two parts. The first was, what is race and why does it matter? Which is a talk that I continue to give.
Mhm.
I like to start with just explaining what race is because a lot of us don't know. We don't
No,
know. Yeah,
people get so confused.
right.
Race, ethnicity,
Right.
culture, and they are very different.
Exactly. And a lot of individuals don't know how they are defined racially. So how do I identify as Black? Why is that? You know, if I lived in another country, would I be considered Black? And what does that mean? So I really start at the foundation in really giving people an understanding of the language and also self-identification. Because if you don't know who you are
Right.
from a racial perspective, how then can you understand how you are interacting with someone who may not be of your race, how
Mhm.
you're perceived by that person, and how you perceive that person,
Yeah.
and what is the lived experience of the person that you're interacting with. So there are a lot of people out here who are doing racial equity, health equity work, and everybody has different approaches. I know that there's some who start sort of top down, and they want to deal in the boardrooms and the top level, the CEOs, the decision makers, and start to talk about changing the structure of the institution to kind of pull out the embedded racism within the system and how it's impacting patients. My approach is almost bottom up. I don't like to say it that way, but it's more of a personal transformation
Mhm.
because we, as hands on healthcare providers, are the ones who are impacting the patients most directly, most interpersonally. It's a very intimate connection. And I feel that a personal transformation will then extend into people who are then change agents and want to work to change the environments and the corporations and the organizations that they're working in and for. So I think there's room for all approaches, but that's really my approach. So what is race and why does it matter? And then I have another talk called Race in Primary Care, because that's really been my area of focus, primary care and office-based women's health for the entirety of my career.
Mhm, mhm. You know, one of the things that I think is important with the conversation, the national, in fact, the global conversation that is going on right now, certainly we're focused on the Black community in the United States.
Yeah.
However, this applies to everybody.
Mhm.
It applies to people who are working in different cultural communities. It applies to those of us. I worked in Indian health for a number of years, you know, and
Okay.
there's some very interesting cultural, racial, whatever you want to call it, but there's certainly um, expectations there. And the same as when you're dealing with patients. And for those of us that do provide one-on-one services with
Mhm.
our patients, what I have found is that people seek out people who are like them,
Correct.
you know, and I've had a number of clients who have sought me out here in Missouri, which isn't as diverse as some places in the country. I mean, I grew up in San Francisco. You can't get too much more diverse than that, right? Maybe New York, but that's it. And but they seek me out specifically because of issues going on in their places of employment regarding race,
Mhm.
regarding discrimination that they themselves are experiencing.
Yes.
And I think it's important that, like you were saying, Juliette, you were the only one on the East Coast, you
Right.
know, so that's a whole nother issue, is having enough providers that are Black, that are Hispanic, that are Asian, that, you
Yeah.
know, that embody the rest of the population.
And that's been supported by research. You know, the research supports the fact that patients of color, but I'm going to say Black in particular, because the research that I've seen is mostly on Black and Hispanic patients, that outcomes and patient experience is better when they receive care from a provider of the same race. Now, does that then mean that white people who identify as white or people who identify as Asian cannot provide care to Black and Latino or Black and Hispanic patients because they're not Black or Latino? Of course, it does not mean that. But what that does mean for people who are not Black or not Hispanic is that they're going to have to really have an understanding of that, not personalize it. Like, what do you mean? I'm a good person. I'm intelligent. I am educated. Why can't I provide care for a Black or Hispanic patient? You absolutely can, but you're doing it with your biases. And everybody has biases.
Yes.
And those biases impact the care that we provide, which has also been supported by research. So there's work that we all need to do on identifying our biases so that when we are in interaction with a patient who is not like us, that it clicks in like, oh, okay. So for me, you know, even though I do this work and I have an understanding of this work, and as I mentioned, that I provide culturally informed LGBTQ care. I don't consider myself an expert by any means. I consider myself more a novice, particularly in trans care, but I had a large following of LGBTQ patients that I tell patients when I first meet them that this is a safe space, that I strive to provide culturally informed LGBTQ care, but I'm honest with them that I struggle with pronouns. So please be patient with me because I'm probably going to screw that up, and feel free to correct me. So I know this, you know, and instead of me being defensive, if I say something and I misgender the patient and they say, actually, I prefer to be called they, instead of me getting defensive about it, I'm like, oh man, I'm working on it. I apologize.
Yeah. You know, that, and that goes back to, I mean, that's really basic in healthcare anyway. If we aren't ever expected to know everything about medicine, right. And it's okay to say, you know, I don't know, but let me go find out, or I'm just learning about this. And it's the same thing when we're dealing with people, you know, in saying, I'm still trying to learn this, so help me out here. Right. And I think people are far more likely to just kind of go, oh gosh, somebody who's going to listen to me. Yes. You know, because for all of us, regardless of what kind of practice you have, that's really what our patients want anyway.
Right.
You know, right. And as nurses, as nurse practitioners, we know that.
Yeah.
But do we do it? And are we listening to one another?
Right. Yeah, listening is key. I think right now, listening is really key. It's really key. Hearing what people are saying as opposed to getting defensive about what you're hearing. Just sitting in the discomfort. Because this right now is a very uncomfortable time, you know, for everybody. Yeah. And some of us, those of us who identify as Black, have been uncomfortable for a very long time. I don't want to say we've gotten used to being uncomfortable, but we survive the discomfort and we don't have a choice. We continue to function and live and love and experience joy and pain, being uncomfortable. But I think for a lot of people, being uncomfortable is really difficult. right now. And so I really encourage people to just sit with it. The discomfort is not going to kill you. It's very uncomfortable, but it's not going to kill you.
Right.
It's going to actually transform you into a person that you'll be proud of.
So how in terms of healthcare, in terms of our practices as nurses, as nurse practitioners, PAs, physicians, chiropractors, whoever is listening to this, how can we as providers in healthcare, in our offices, what do we do? How do we listen to our patients? You know, is there some personal work that we have to do first? Is there something we should be saying to our patients to actually encourage them to talk, to really talk about what it is that they need?
Right.
You know, I know, you know, and I think anybody who's watched, anybody who's listened, or anybody who's done their any journal reading, we all know that when it comes to healthcare, you know, one of the big issues is people aren't taken seriously when
Right.
they come in with something. So and that's just not around race either. You know,
Right.
that's, you know, oh, you think somebody's a little unstable, or you know, they're a hypochondriac, or they have symptoms that cannot be explained but are just as real. You know,
Right.
so we do that a lot. So how can we, what are your recommendations that we as a person, as an individual, since that's the area you like to work from, what do I need to do in my office in
Okay.
order to really hear people?
Right. Well, the first step, and what is being actively called for as part of this movement, is educate yourself. Educate yourself about race, educate yourself about racism in this country and racism in healthcare. You can do it by reading a book, you can do it by taking a course. I haven't written a book, but on my website, I have a ton of resources that I'm actually updating as we speak, and I continue to add to them when I find really excellent resources that I think will be helpful. So educate yourself first. And that doesn't mean necessarily asking your Black friend to educate you, because that's one of the things that Black people are finding increasingly exhausting as we're trying to deal with our pain and grief. There's lots of resources out there. And then educate yourself about the patients that you have in your community, the patients that you are serving. Cultural competence is a word that has been around for a long time. It's a word that I still use reluctantly because it's the word that people are most familiar with, but it's kind of gone out of favor because old cultural competence training really focused on teaching the cultural practices and language and foods and, you know, really just the culture of any number of different races and ethnicities. The problem with that is that there are so many different races and ethnicities, and the lived experience of each individual will be different. So as I mentioned, I identify as Black. I identify also as Black American. Some people would say African American. I answer to that, but I identify as Black American because I am a descendant of enslaved Africans, and my lived experience is different than someone who has immigrated recently from Africa who's really an African American. So, but that's my choice and my lived experience. So my lived experience as a Black person may be very different, as I said, than someone who just immigrated from West Africa, from Nigeria, from Ghana. What may be different from someone whose parents are from Jamaica, but they grew up in the US, born and raised in the US. So there's no way to really learn all of the potential variables that could impact the lived experience of the person who's sitting in front of you. That being said, if you have a large population of people from Ecuador or people from the Philippines who are your patient population, it would behoove you to learn some things about those cultures so that you can have a rapport with those patients. So I had a patient the other day. She spoke pretty good English. I don't really speak Spanish. I can, but I'm really, I'm embarrassed about my accent, so I don't. But I know quite a bit of Spanish words. So I was doing her exam, and I was examining her thyroid, and I asked her, I said, please swallow. And she nodded her head, and I knew she didn't know what I meant. So I said tragar, which in my terrible accent means swallow in Spanish. And I said, I bet you didn't know I knew that word. And we just laughed and joked about it because it just makes it not so intense and so like, oh my gosh, she doesn't speak English. How is she going to take, how is she going to understand me? And, then I went on to tell her that I understood, or I knew a poquito of Spanish. And just the fact that I made an effort, it
exactly.
increases the rapport and the comfort of the patient.
Mm-hmm.
So
rapport is everything.
All we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Rapport is everything. If you don't have rapport with your patient, you're just not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so having that basic understanding and learning, being open to learning more. I learned so much from my patients. And again, because it's New York, I worked at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York. It's a public college, very diverse. Most of the undergraduates are first generation to go to college. I actually had a map in my office because people were from countries that I literally did not know where they were. And I would have them point to that on the map. And then I've gotten to the point where now I play a game with patients and I'll say, I bet you I can guess where your family is from in 3 tries. And they're like, you're not going to guess. But over time, in working in these environments, patients, because I start a conversation with them, maybe 5 minutes, patients will give me little tricks to figure out. So I know that if a patient's last name is Lee and it's spelled L-E, they're probably from Vietnam. If the patient has a certain consonant strung together and they pronounce their name in a certain way, they're probably from Turkey. So I've gotten really good because I've had those conversations with patients, and then it becomes sort of an icebreaker when I meet someone new. And then I do my little dog and pony trick. I can guess where your family's from. And they're like, you're not going to guess. And I guess, and they're like, oh my God, how did you know? So that just opens up. It opens me up. It opens the patient up. It tells them that I'm interested in more than the reason that they came in. It provides an avenue for me to have a conversation with them about something other than the reason that they came in, but may be contributing to that. Perhaps if they come from a very conservative family, that's going to play a role in our conversation about family planning. So it's all part of who we are, and it's all part of the visit. And we don't have to do anything big. Educate ourselves, learn about our patients, and look for those opportunities to learn even more from the patient who's sitting in front of you in the moment.
This reminds me of Nursing 101.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. So that means all of us have the skills to just give it a few minutes to get to know that person.
Yes.
So we do that. We develop rapport. We've educated ourselves. And what more can I do, or a nurse practitioner can do, who owns her own practice? It's hers, so she can change anything she wants.
Mhm.
What can she do to change her practice environment?
So again, it's coming from that personal transformation lens. Do I want to create an environment that is welcoming to the community? Who's in my community? You know, do I even really know who's in my community? Who is my patient population? And I've taken your courses, so I know that you have to do that as part of figuring out, even if you have a viable business. But think about it from the lens of race and ethnicity. Who's in the community? And what sort of services do I need to provide for that population that I'm serving? Do I need to have patient information in Russian because I'm working in an area that's Russian and or Orthodox? If I have a Muslim population, am I going to make sure that I have female providers because it may not be comfortable or allowed for my patient to be examined by a male provider? Do I need to have staff in my office that speak multiple languages? Like I said, it's so diverse where I work. I mean, there's Filipino, there's Guyanese, there's Caribbean. I've had Hasidic Jewish patients. So it's really tough to be able to provide exactly what every single one of those diverse populations needs. But can you hire staff so that, you know, your medical assistant actually speaks Russian and she may be able to translate for you? Or somebody else who speaks Spanish or Tagalog. You know, what can you do to make it an environment where people feel welcomed and that they understand, not just through your words, but through your actions and how you've structured your practice, that you're making an effort to meet their needs and meet all of their needs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know what you said earlier, I mean, when starting that practice, you do need to know who it is you're going to serve, and then finding out what the what some of the barriers might be.
Right.
It might be a language barrier. So if you are, particularly if you're doing a solo practice and you may not have any employees to start out with, or maybe just have one or two, do you need to find a service?
Right.
But beyond language, what are some of the recommendations that you might make?
I would also say, because I noticed this a lot in marketing. So in marketing campaigns, who do you have? Which of the stock photos that you selected to represent you and the type of patients that you're trying to attract? I can tell you that when I was working at the former practice where I was the only one, that patients, some of them would kind of dance around the issue and some would just come out and say, they were like, you know what, I stumbled upon the website and I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked and I was like, ooh, there's one. There's a Black person. That's the person that I want to connect with.
Right.
But if there's no people of color in your print material, in your flyers, in your billboard that you have outside, on your website, even if you're using stock photos, then it says to people who are looking for someone who they believe is going to be culturally informed that this person probably doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Because they have not even taken the effort to include that in their marketing.
Right. And I will tell you, that's not easy to do, because if you look at our blog, or any of our course material or anything else, I've had to specifically dive deep into these stock photo sites to find that.
Yeah.
It's not easy, and it's more difficult on the free sites. And when
And it's, but like I said about being uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable and it requires a little bit more work.
it does,
But what it requires from you is being intentional about it because you understand how important it is.
being aware of it.
Yes.
You know, so I know that when I look at stuff, and I'm biracial, and I don't see anybody that looks like me, because, you know, I mean, growing up, it's like, well, who are you? What are you? You know, you're too light, you're too dark, you're
Mhm.
not, you know. So I'm very aware of it, and you have to really dig, but it's so important
Yes.
for, at least for me, to have all kinds of people in our marketing material, because we are all kinds of people.
Exactly.
You know, nurses, nurse practitioners, we are diverse. We're not as diverse as I would like to see us, and I
Right.
think that that will come. But then that goes to a whole nother issue, and that's in our educational system and our nursing leadership, and you know, we don't see enough diversity higher up.
Exactly. And I think, you know, everybody's all fired up right now because of everything that's going on. Everybody really wants to, you know, there's a lot of shame people are kind of wrestling with, and outrage and anger and sadness and grief. It's just the big, you know, intense emotions, which I think are necessary. It's sort of like a purge, a cleansing that we need. My concern is that after all of the adrenaline and the intensity starts to die down, when the hashtags are old and played out, when the media has moved on to the next thing that they're going to focus on, what structural changes have we put into place so that we don't find ourselves back here again? And I think almost even more importantly, that Black people in particular right now do not feel that after all that we've said and all that has happened, that people have just been like, okay, I'm ready to move on to something else, and there's not been any change. So what you mentioned in terms of education, and also healthcare, there are systems. So there's healthcare system, the education system, housing, criminal justice. These are all systems that there's a term that has been thrown around a lot, structural racism, that has to do with the fact that racism is actually embedded in the system.
Yeah.
So it's not really about the individual. The individual is a part of it, but the structure of the system itself is infused with racism. So, you know, you could talk about just even textbooks. You know, I have a lot of friends who are adjunct professors, and they have to supplement material because the textbooks they won't even have a chapter, sometimes not even a page. They'll have one of those boxes on the page that speaks to diversity.
Or nothing
And
at
that's,
all, or incorrect information. I mean, even in high school, I had a Japanese history teacher
hmm,
who, his job was, okay, this is the book we have to teach out of. Now go to the library and find the truth.
right.
Because it didn't even talk about the camps that we put Japanese in
Oh,
during
yeah,
World War II.
right,
You know, it had very little about Native Americans,
right.
you know, and it certainly didn't have a lot of information about slavery. You know,
Exactly.
that was high school. That was many years ago, but that was still post civil rights.
Right. And you probably would be surprised that it has not changed as much as you would think. It has, particularly when it comes to textbooks. So we could then, okay, if you think about the education system and you think of how we're being taught, and then you think of what happens when a nurse practitioner or healthcare provider graduates from this healthcare or from this education system that has been infused with structural racism, and then this individual then goes to practice in another system, the healthcare system, with that information that has already been, like I said, infused with structural racism. Then they go into another system, the healthcare system, that's infused with structural racism. That's when you get situations where the pain of Black patients is not being taken seriously because the educational system has told this healthcare provider that Black people may not experience pain the same way as white people. And that has been, has been documented. This was, I think, in 2017, there was a nursing textbook that had a page about pain and ethnicity, and it was just full of stereotypes and misinformation. So it looks like this individual is racist because this individual is taking care of a pregnant Black woman who's saying that she has a splitting headache and it's dismissed, but it's the system of racism that impacted that person's education and now is impacting that person's practice when they go to provide care to someone who doesn't look like them.
Right. Right. So again, our education, our nursing leadership, our organizations that are out there, specifically for us, we have AANP, the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, and ANA, the American Nurses Associations. But then there's also the Midwifery Association and all the rest of them. What can our nursing leaders and our educational leaders, what do they need to start doing? Educating themselves, and then what?
Everyone starts with education, and then in those systems, so the educational system, in academia, in organizational corporate systems, in the boardroom, once you've educated yourself, look around the room. Just look around. When you're having a meeting, now we're doing Zoom. Look at whose faces are in those boxes that show up on your screen. What do they look like? Does everybody look like you? If everybody looks like you, there's a problem. If everybody in the room is in complete agreement with what's being said, and there's not one person who says, you know what, I see things differently, and feels safe and comfortable doing that.
That's key. Feeling safe.
Yes.
To be able to speak up, because we don't always feel safe to speak up.
Especially in those kind of spaces.
Right.
So, and if you look around and everybody looks like you, everybody is in complete agreement with what's being said, can you speak up? And if you feel that you can't speak up on your own, can you have side conversations with people, because you've learned a little bit more about listening, with people who this person might be like-minded, not like-minded with the entire group, but like-minded with me, because something about what's being said here and something about the way this room looks isn't sitting well with me. Is there anybody else in the room who might be an ally that the two of us Maybe we may not feel comfortable saying it in that meeting, but maybe we can write an email. Maybe we can get it on the agenda. Maybe we can say, you know what? I have a colleague of color that would be excellent for X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Because we exist. You know, I've been in situations, as I mentioned, where I was the only one. And I said, you know, can we talk about some strategies for recruiting more providers of color? Well, you know, we've looked into that and there just aren't anybody. I am a proud graduate of a historically Black college, Howard University, HU. Howard University has a medical school, they have a dental school, they have a nursing school, they have a PA school, they have a nutrition program. Trust me, we exist.
Mm-hmm.
We're out here. So to say that we can't find anyone, that means that you haven't done your work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. So you educate organizations and individuals. Can you talk about that? How do you, let's just say you've been invited into the Main Street Clinic. And I'm sorry if there's a Main Street Clinic out there. I'm sure there is somewhere, but I always use that name. I don't mean anybody in particular, but you know, maybe they're a large organization. Maybe it's the Main Street Hospital. And they finally say, okay, we need to look at this.
Right.
Let's get Juliette to come in.
Right.
So what are some of the things that you might look at in that organization in terms of getting started with them?
Right.
and to actually, just like in your Duke project and in anybody's Duke project, how do you get the stakeholders involved?
Right. So I've really start with asking questions. And the primary question is, what is your goal? What do you hope to accomplish? Are you doing this to check a box? Because if it's to check a box, I'm really not interested. Are you doing it because of everything that's going on here, and the shield has been lifted from your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, my employees of color, my Black employees have been silenced and marginalized, or they've been saying this and we haven't been hearing it. What can we do? We don't know where to start. But what is the goal? What do you hope to accomplish? Do you want to be able to create a dialogue? Do you feel like you don't have any information? So if it's more of a situation where you want to learn more about implicit bias, then that's what is race and why does it matter? And I'm talking to you specifically about what is race, what is racism, what is implicit bias, et cetera. It's more of an educational tool. I would hope that that would be followed by something else, but if that's all you want in the moment, then that's fine. If you really are looking to change the hearts and minds of your organization, I am able to provide what is race and why does that matter as more of an interactive workshop that we have time to process some of the things that we've learned. We're able to do some free writing. We're able to do some sharing. We're able to answer some questions anonymously and have a dialogue, a question and answer, so that what you're learning is not just, you know, didactic. I'm listening to a presentation, but I'm actually integrating what I've learned into answering questions. And I'm processing what I'm hearing so that it actually is starting to impact me. And typically, after all of my classes or sessions that I give, I encourage people as a first step to start to have conversations with people that they feel safe with, which is typically our family, our immediate family, about what we've learned. having those dialogues with people that you feel safe with is a lot easier than, I always laugh because I don't know what it is about me. I have one of those faces or that kind of energy where people just randomly start talking to me about race. I was standing on the line for the pharmacy the other day and a lady struck up a conversation. I don't mind having these conversations, but 5 minutes into the conversation, she felt the need to tell me, well, I'm not racist. Like, what am I supposed to do with that information? And why was it necessary for her to tell me that? Oh, okay. So you're not racist? Okay. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
So rather than having those kind of conversations with people you don't know, start with your family and start to do the same thing that I'm asking people in organizations to do about looking around the room and seeing who's there, is looking around your social network. Are all your friends? Do they all look like you? Do they all vote like you? Do they all frequent the same places? What about your kids? What do your kids' circle look like? And is that something that's important for you to change? It may not be. And if it's not, doing some sort of soul searching and finding out why that is. And is that something that I need to change about myself? And how is that potentially impacting the people that I interact with? So that's usually where I start. What is your goal? From the courses that I offer, we can just do didactic information. We can do something that's more experiential learning. And then there's always going to be homework.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be homework.
Well,
and it's not a one and done.
Life has homework. Life has homework. Yeah. And I think it's so important on an individual level that we do, as you've said, start questioning and maybe speaking up more often. I remember years ago, I'll fill out anybody's survey for their doctoral projects. I mean, I'll help out where I can. But I had one many, many years ago. They sent me the forms. Of course, this is before everything was online. Sent me the form and to fill out. And then at the very end, they wanted me to choose one box. Was I white? Was I Hispanic? Was I Black? Was I Asian? And that, I don't think Asian was the actual term at that time. And I wrote a letter on that form and sent it back to her. And I said, I refuse to fill out anything that has me pick just one. While our country has kind of this unspoken still one drop rule, I don't think that it's fair to my parents, who took a lot of risk at the time. And so I think challenging that person wrote back and said, oh my gosh, thank you. And she changed her form.
There we go.
And so sometimes just speaking up, even a little bit, starts that change happening and that awareness happening. Because we don't always have the awareness. And if we don't have the awareness, we can't make a change.
Exactly.
We cannot make a change without awareness.
And you may have been one of many people who was asked to fill out that survey who identified as multiracial, and they just either cursed under their breath and balled up the survey and threw it in the garbage, or they, had angst and stress about, how do I fill this out? And if I only select one race, what does that mean for my other parent? And I feel like I'm dishonoring my ancestry and my heritage. I mean, something as simple as being forced to check a box can create that level of angst.
It did.
And that level of, introspection that people of color have to manage and navigate every single day. But the intention of the person who sent that survey to you was certainly not to create that. So I really commend the person for, instead of getting defensive, listening to what you said, again, listening, and making, which is a term that's also another term that's been circulating a lot recently, taking an anti-racist action, which was to say, you know what, you're absolutely right, I'm going to change this form.
Yeah.
It may not have been important to me because I don't identify as white, but clearly it's important to this person who identifies as multiracial. And if she feels this way, there's probably other people who feel this way. And there's some action that I can take that will change not only the data that I'm gathering, but will change the experience of the people who are interacting with my form.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that important.
It is important. It's important, I think, for all of us, regardless of who we are, that we're recognized.
Exactly.
That we count, that we make a difference. And it doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter if you are 5 times multiracial. It doesn't matter. You count, you're important, and you make a difference in this world. And we all need to, to this day, and I am so grateful for my parents, because I still don't understand why we don't see the value in everybody. That was just something that was so instilled in us, that everybody, I mean, it's great. It's a melting pot, and that's the only way that the world can exist.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the one drop rule. People who are listening may not know that there was the Racial Integrity Act of 1926, I believe, that said that if you have one drop of Black blood, then you're considered Black. So that's what she was referring to. And also, a lot of people don't know, and these are things that I talk about in my talks, because I incorporate history into all of my talks, because I really feel that it's very important to have a historical perspective about how we got here. And that the Loving case, the couple's last name was Loving, went to the Supreme Court, and they finally outlawed banning interracial marriage in multiple states around the nation that had laws against interracial marriages. And that wasn't until 1967, which is nuts.
Yep.
If you think about it. 1967, there were laws in states that said people could not have an interracial marriage.
Right. And my parents had been married a number of years by then.
By that time.
A number of years. And so, yeah.
Their lived experience.
I can't. I know that they made moves. I know that there was a lot of fear. And I know that they did their best to raise the 5 of us where we were aware, but we weren't impacted.
Right. You weren't traumatized.
No, I wasn't traumatized as a child. I wasn't. And some people seem to think that I might have been, but no, I'm I feel blessed with the parents that I had, and how I grew up. And I'm certainly very blessed to have grown up in San Francisco, because everything goes. Everything goes. And you don't, I mean, we all prejudge to a degree. I mean, that's just part of our brain patterns.
Part of the
we look for patterns, and that's how our brain works, period.
Exactly.
But there's a way to do that is not harmful, that's not, that doesn't create the racial biases, that doesn't create any of the isms that are out there.
It's the assumptions that we make. Implicit bias, for people, if that word is a little too complex for people, they don't understand it. A lot of times implicit bias is described as assumptions, that they're just assumptions that we make about people, circumstances, situations, based on how we were raised, what we're exposed to. Most influential is the media. And we start to make assumptions. And making those assumptions, as you mentioned, is just kind of what the brain does. It's what we all do. Mm-hmm. It becomes racism based on what you do with that assumption. So if you really have not interacted with Black people, on a one-on-one basis in your life, just because of where you live or just the circumstances of your lived experience. So your only exposure to Black people is what you see through the media. And you understand that the media is part of another system that is infused with systemic racism, so that the thing that sells, the things that get people to buy ads and gets clicks and for people to watch, are the sensational stories that Black people are portrayed in an extremely negative light. It's no wonder that you assume that this Black person that you're now meeting for the first time is based on those negative things that you've been fed and inundated with your whole life. But what are you going to then do with that assumption? Are you going to assume that this person sitting in front of you is going to rob you, going to do harm, is uneducated, unwed, has multiple children out of wedlock? Or are you going to get to know the person who's sitting in front of you? Are you going to ask questions? Are you going to be curious? Are you going to learn? That's what makes it go from implicit bias and assumptions, which we all have, mm-hmm. to racism.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that this is opening a dialogue for everybody in their practices, in your families, in your communities, and certainly within our organizations. As nurses, nurse practitioners, we are still considered the most trusted profession out there. We are entrusted with literally with people's lives.
Yeah.
And how are we going to meet all of the people that come into our offices? And how are we going to treat them? And how are we going to have that conversation that needs to be had so that everybody is welcome in our practices? So, Juliette, how do people find you? How do they, if they just want to read your blog, or if they want to talk with you about maybe doing some training or speaking for them, how do they find you?
The best way is through my website, which is Juliette, Juliette is my middle initial, Blount, spelled BLOUNT, for nurse practitioner. So Juliette G Blount, NP.com. You can contact me through the website. You can learn a little bit more about what is equity, how I see equity. As I mentioned, I am in the process of updating the resource page, which has links to podcasts and books and articles and YouTube videos that you can watch to learn more. If you don't understand what systemic racism means, you can go to my website and I'll have a link that explains more about it. You can also follow me on social media, which I'm kind of a novice, but I'm getting better. Getting better. I'm most active on LinkedIn, shockingly. My LinkedIn page is HealthEquityNP. And my social media handle on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, which I'm probably second most active on, is at HealthEquityNP.
Excellent.
And
I will definitely have all those links below
Yeah.
the video, wherever you are watching this video. So any last words, anything I didn't ask you that you would like to say?
This has kind of been my mantra since, it's kind of like all of this started because a lot of people are like, how did we get to where we are now? It's like we started with COVID, and COVID, highlighted the health disparities for Black and Brown people, not just now, but they have been present for centuries. And so Black people and people of color, people who identify as people of color, were watching the numbers of Black and Brown people getting sick and dying by the thousands. And then we had killing after killing after killing in rapid succession while we have nothing to do but sit in our houses and watch TV. And Black people are again traumatized by seeing this over and over again. Again, this wasn't something that just happened now. Black people have been targeted and killed by the police for centuries. And I think we just got tired, sick and tired of being sick, literally, and tired. So it's erupted into this reaction. And out of all of this pain, I believe that there are lessons and blessings that can come out of it in terms of being an opportunity for us to really go deep within ourselves and within our organizations, within our corporations, and start to try to chip away at that structural racism that's built into these systems. So there's lessons and blessings that can come out of all of this pain if we choose to accept them. And that is the big if.
Yeah.
If we choose to accept them. And I hope we will. I hope we will, take this time. It's an opportunity. And the fact that it's not only in the US, it is global.
Global.
There are protests in the street in London and Paris and in Australia talking about the indigenous Aborigines and how they've been treated. Sort of a combination of African Americans and Native Americans in terms of their experience.
Right, right. Canada as well.
Okay, I didn't even see Canada.
Canada
So it's
as well.
global.
And yeah, it is everywhere. It is everywhere. And it needs to be addressed. And as someone who lived through the civil rights, yes, I am that old. That I actually, I was a little bit young, but I was also naive because, at the end of that, as I'm entering into my, teens and stuff, I'm like, okay, this is done now, right? And
Right.
it's not done. So
Not done.
I do hope we have some long-term change. I hope this is putting us on the road that we needed to be on for hundreds of years. We needed to be on this road.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone who's listened and who are taking the lessons and blessings and are going to run with it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And again, I'll have links so that you can get a hold of Juliette below this video. So bye-bye now.
Thank you.